Hi, everyone. My name is Connor Riley, and on tonight's Connor in Coverage, we're going to talk about how Kirby Smart, he doesn't do this for fun. He doesn't do this for amusement, but he's damn good at recruiting. And in the last week, Georgia has shown why that is exactly the case and why it's a big reason Georgia is the two-time defending national champions. Hello, everyone, and welcome in a little Sunday night talking some Georgia recruiting, some news, some notes, some updates. My name is Connor Riley. I'm back from vacation. We've been off for first week of July here. Was on a DawgNation video on Wednesday, but back in the saddle, so to speak. We'll have a story tomorrow morning on one of the big takeaways from this past week. But what has been a simply massive, I'll say it again, massive recruiting, heater for the Georgia football program. Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs, the number one ranked recruiting class in the country, has been the case for most of this cycle at this point. But what they have done really since the start of July, and if you want to even include the evening hours on June 30th, I think you can do that as well. The Bulldogs are now, I believe, up to 26 commitments in the class for this cycle. Number one overall. They have picked up 5 since that June 30th start date, starting with Michael Inui right there on the 30th. Georgia beats out Michigan and Alabama to land his services. Then on July 5th, Georgia gets a commitment from Daniel Calhoun. We did a video on him last week. I popped on live from the Atlantic Ocean to discuss that, why it was a big deal, why I think going forward Georgia is in a good spot there on the offensive line, what that means there. On Thursday night, Georgia got a commitment from defensive lineman Joseph Justin Anoy. If I mispronounce his name there, I apologize. Joseph Jonah Ajoye, excuse me. Big defensive lineman. When we started these back in June, Georgia had no defensive line commitments. I believe they are now up to 4. And with some pretty big fish still out there, they have a chance to really close strong there. So Trey Scott putting in major work there. Similar to the way Stacey Searles has done so over the past sort of week, really. When you consider that on Friday, they landed Nair Daniels out of New Jersey. And then on Saturday, they land Marquise Easley out of Illinois, giving Georgia 5 commitments in 8 days, 4 straight commitments there. As it stands right now on today, July 9th, there has not been a 5th straight commitment today, but I think Georgia fans are okay with that, given the way that things have developed for Georgia of late here. And so with that in mind, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened this past week, but also focus on what's left, because as it stands, Georgia does have 26 commitments in this class right now. And, while yes, transfer portal allows for Georgia to sign more guys than the traditional 25-man limit, there might not be a whole lot of space left in this class. And that really means there are only a few big fish still out there for Georgia in terms of who they are looking for, who they are going after, and what's really left on the table there. But with the way that Georgia recruits now, specifically in terms of the calendar and the way things go, they want to have most of their work, most of their visits done during the month of June. They want to knock a lot of those out when their coaches are really able to focus on those visits and showing and having that personal one-on-one time to explain why they're the best. Because in season, that is harder because you're at the mercy of the schedule. We've heard Kirby Smart talk before about why he doesn't love night games, in part because it's just less time that you get to spend with recruits because you're focused on the game all day and then you don't get done with the game till late at night sometimes. And so it's sort of balancing a little bit of both of those in terms of having them in June. And so I think you are going to see going forward, well, you're not going to have 26 commitments in every class. I do think that you're going to see more and more of Georgia's recruiting class done by the end of July. Now, maybe not necessarily in the first week of July as we have seen this year, but Georgia did a lot of work early in this class and has continued to do so. And this past week, I think really shows that. And while, obviously Jeff and BA talked a lot about the commitment of Joseph Jonah Ajoye on Thursday, we're going to really focus here on the offensive line and the work done there. I've got a story on this coming tomorrow, and I'm not the first person to point this out, but I did dig deeper a little bit into the numbers here. This is the second biggest offensive line class in terms of weight that Georgia has signed. They have 6 commitments right now: Marcus Harrison, Malachi Tolliver, Daniel Calhoun, Nair Daniels, Michael Inui, and Marquise Easley. Those are the 6 guys committed right now to Georgia, and it is the tallest class, with the average height being, I believe, going off the top of my head here with the math, always a bit of a dangerous game. The average offensive lineman for this class is 6'6" and 328 pounds. By comparison, last year's offensive line class, which pretty talented guys like Monroe Fielding, Bo Hewley, Kelton Smith, a talented offensive line haul, they came in with an average weight of 295 pounds. And so obviously, with any offensive lineman coming in, this is not a position where guys play early. Andrew Thomas is the only freshman to start a game for Georgia on the offensive line. True freshman, I should clarify there. There have been a few red shirts along the way. Andrew Thomas is still the only freshman to start a game for Georgia. And recently, I believe Amarius Mims is the only offensive lineman other than Andrew Thomas that did not redshirt as a freshman. So this is a position where you're going to come in, you're going to sit, and you're going to wait, in part because a lot of times these guys are having to resculpt their bodies. And that's going to be true even with a heavier class. Someone like Daniel Calhoun, we know he's going to come in and probably lose some weight and reshape his body a little bit and lose some of that baby fat. That's just the reality of coming in when you are that size. But with Stacey Searle, since he is taking over as the offensive line coach for Matt Luke, this is clearly an offensive line that has trended bigger. The two, in terms of height, the two tallest offensive line classes in terms of average height entering in have been in these past two cycles. And so clearly, I think Stacey is looking for a bigger offensive lineman coming in. And, it was a big change when Sam Pittman came in from Mark Richt. You didn't see Georgia recruit a lot of 300-pound offensive linemen anymore, guys that were sub 300 pounds. When Matt Luke took over, you saw them maybe look for that more athletic model and guys who were going to have to put on weight early in college, but could eventually get there with more flexible offensive linemen. And I think that ties into what Todd Monken was looking for as well there. So I think with Coach Searles now, you see and you have a good idea of what he's looking for in his offensive linemen. For example, Daniel Calhoun, 6'6", 355 pounds. Nair Daniels, 6'8", 340 pounds. Marcus Harrison, 6'7", 336 pounds. Michael Inouye, he's the skinny one of the bunch at 290 pounds. He's also 6'7", so he clearly has the ability to add weight there. Monroe Freeling is someone, I think, 6'6.5". He came in 294 pounds, and he is getting his weight up there to where it is in a better place. And even, you look back, someone like Amarius Mims came in 6'7" at 315 was his listed weight. He's playing at 335, and if he wanted to, he could probably put on even more weight there. So I think you've seen under Coach Searles, this is an offensive line that's gotten bigger. That is by design. You even look across the guys that are starting there. Consider 2 years ago, you had Jamari Sawyer and you had Justin Schaefer in the second half of that national championship game as your guards. Those guys both 6'4", not huge per se. And then you look this season, Tate Ratledge is a legit 6'5". Xavier Trush is pushing 6'7". Those are your two offensive guards there. You're just a lot bigger. Obviously, Amarius Mims, there aren't a whole lot of human beings out there that are of that size. And so it is, in general, just a bigger offensive line that Georgia has had. And it'll be interesting to see what that sort of allows Georgia to do. Obviously, last year, that group had a ton of success. 9 sacks, I believe, given up all season. In my opinion, if they wait to award the Joe Moore Award after the season ends, I think Georgia pretty clearly wins that award. I think how both the Michigan front and the Georgia front did against TCU would have definitely helped in Georgia's favor there. And one of the things I did in going back and looking at past recruiting hauls and looking obviously at their heights and weights, but also a little bit in their recruiting numbers in terms of where guys were ranked and slotted coming in. This is not the greatest offensive line class. Daniel Calhoun is the highest ranked right now, number 97 overall. There is not that 5-star, stud guy, Amarius Mims, Broderick Jones, even Isaiah Wilson back in the 2017 cycle leaped to mind there. But I think that's more of a byproduct of the offensive line class as a whole in terms of the 2024 recruiting cycle. It is not a great offensive line class in terms of just elite guys at the top there. Only 11 offensive linemen right now rank among the top 100 overall prospects in the 2024 recruiting cycle. That would be the lowest of the Kirby Smart tenure at Georgia. And I think that just sort of speaks to, in general, a dearth of offensive linemen in this cycle that traditionally measure up and fit what a team of Georgia's caliber is looking for. And I think because of that, it makes the battles that Georgia has already won all the more important. Daniel Calhoun, Nair Daniels, Michael Inouye. Georgia was battling some big time programs for those guys, specifically Alabama, and we can include Marquise Easley here as well out of Illinois. Alabama wanted Calhoun, they wanted Inouye, and they wanted Easley, and Georgia beat them on all three of them. Now, how much would they beat by? We don't know. I know that Alabama made a very strong push to land Calhoun, and Georgia went in there and won that. And in sort of wrapping and putting a bow on the offensive line subject, Stacey Searles was a guy who, even from me, faced a lot of questions when he came to Georgia, and this hire was made of, well, you talk so much about recruiting and the importance of that in his first tenure at Georgia. He didn't do what Kirby Smart was doing. But I think it's so hard to compare what anyone on Georgia's staff was doing from a recruiting standpoint before Kirby Smart was the head coach to what he has done now. He has supercharged recruiting across all positions, and the tide rises all boats. I think with the way that he recruits, and obviously as well the way that this program is built. Look, no program has put more players in the NFL in the last 3 years than Georgia. Georgia's won back-to-back national championships. As great as this staff is with interpersonal relationships and convincing them that this is the best place, and convincing parents that this is the best place for their sons, it absolutely helps to have tangible things that you can point to that say, hey, not only are we telling you this, we have the proof to back it up. Georgia had 2 offensive linemen taken in last year's draft. Both their offensive tackles got drafted. If you have elite measurables and you are good enough to play at Georgia and you come to Georgia, odds are you're probably going to be a first-round pick. Andrew Thomas, Isaiah Wilson, Broderick Jones. Jamari Sawyer was not, but he started 13 games last year for a team that went to the playoffs in the Los Angeles Chargers, and it was very clearly better than the 6th-round pick that he was billed as. And so I say all that. Stacey Searles clearly knows what he's looking for in the offensive line now. I think he's identified that. I think we have enough of a sample size to have some idea of a blueprint in terms of what he is looking for. And this is a guy that deserves major credit, has answered a ton of questions. And the biggest one was, could he go out and recruit at an elite level? I think this last week has shown you that. And then when you factor in with what you saw from this offensive line last year, I thought the 2022 Georgia offensive line was a clear upgrade over what the Bulldogs had in 2021. And I think Searles' direction deserves a lot of credit for that. That's not to paint a negative light on Matt Luke. I just thought the offensive line was better this past season. And so going into 2023, I think that's going to be the case again. And for me, if I do ultimately pick in the preseason that Georgia's going to win the national title, I do think they're going to win every regular season game. Their offensive line is going to be a big reason why that's the case, because yes, you have changed at quarterback, you have changed at offensive coordinator. If this offensive line under Stacey Searles is as good as it was a season ago and continues to be when they bring in this new realm of recruits, Georgia's going to be very, very good for the foreseeable future because their offensive line is that good. Yes, some schools have other quarterbacks. Some schools have better wide receiver play. When you win on the lines of scrimmage the way Georgia has won in the last 2 years, it's just really hard to lose a lot of games. And, some team might beat you in a one-off. We saw Alabama do that in the SEC championship game. But when you have those kind of bodies, both the talent and just the raw depth that a team like Georgia has makes winning a whole lot easier. So a little bit longer there than I had anticipated on the offensive line. But we like to give those guys the proper respect here. We're an offensive line program. And so we want to talk a little bit about that. And so transitioning here a little bit into what is left for Georgia in this class. As mentioned before, 26 commitments in this class. And really, you look out there, offensive line is probably done. Tight end is done. There are a few pieces out there, and they're really, for the most part, big names. And we'll go through them right now. At the running back position, they have 2 commitments in Dwight Phillips and Chauncey Bowens. Chauncey Bowens earned an invite to the All-American Bowl in San Antonio today. Big ups to him for doing so. The name to know there is Nate Frazier. Nate Frazier is a running back that plays for Mater Dei out in Santa Ana, California, a powerhouse program there, where JT Daniels, Bryce Young, a number of elite players have gone over the course of their careers. And Georgia and Alabama are duking it out for a guy that some recruiting services think is the number 1 running back in this class. I think you understand, you look at Georgia's current running back room and the inability of some of those guys to stay healthy, along with the fact that Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards are both seniors. I think you see why Georgia could take a third wide receiver or a third running back, excuse me. I also think you look at a guy like Dwight Phillips. I don't think you necessarily, because of his speed and what he is able to do, I don't think you necessarily have to pigeonhole him as a running back and can maybe use him in sort of a Mecole Hardman type way where, you use him as a slot receiver, you move him around formations. Yes, you can give him the ball as a running back, but if you develop him as an offensive weapon, a la in the way, say, the 49ers employ Deebo Samuel, I don't know to compare those two players, but I think that could potentially be what Phillips does for Georgia as opposed to being an every down running back like, say, Chauncey Bowens is there. A wide receiver, look, everyone wants Georgia to sign a five-star wide receiver. Mike Matthews is still undergoing his recruitment. Ryan Wingo is a name who I'm not even sure he's a five-star anymore, but that is someone who Georgia has certainly kicked the tires on. It sounds like Jeremiah Smith is locked into Ohio State there. If I had to make a wager right now, the longer that Mike Matthews remains uncommitted is probably a good thing for Georgia. But as it stands right now, I'm not sure they're necessarily going to add at that position, but we'll see. They're obviously going to keep trying. And I will say, even if they don't, I really like Nitro Tuggle. Mike Carr is a stud there. And so I think with what Georgia has already at that wide receiver position, Jacoby White is a guy that Jeff Sentell raves about. Anyone that has seen him has been a big fan of his. And so I think at wide receiver, while sure you'd love a big, big name there, I think you trust with what you have. And, the reality is, while yes, recruiting that position is incredibly important, I think wide receiver is one of the positions where there's going to be guys in there in the transfer portal every year that can come in and help you. You're going to see Georgia do that this season with Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas. But even you look at some of the other programs, A.D. Mitchell is a guy that Texas got out of the transfer portal that, say what you want about him, that guy is a talented football player. Jamison Williams from Alabama left Ohio State, was, buried behind guys like Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, goes in, stars at Alabama right away, has a huge, huge impact there. And so I think we've seen that, be a position where you can sort of expect that to be a popular transfer portal play every single year. And it wouldn't surprise me if Georgia leans into that a little bit more going forward. Tight end, I believe, is done. You have Jaden Riddell. You have Colton Heinrich there. I know Carter Nelson committed to Nebraska. That was a guy they looked around on, but I think Georgia feels very good about the two guys that they have at that position right now. I think offensive line is done with the 6 commitments that Georgia has right there. Defensive line, Georgia has 4 commitments right now, and the big one out there, in my opinion, is Williams-Narini, defensive line prospect out of Missouri. It sounds like a Georgia-Oklahoma battle. Obviously, I believe Narini got to Georgia twice during the month of June. We'll see how long this goes. I know there was some talk out there he may commit before the season starts. Georgia's made a very clear push, and they're very much in this right now for Narini, who is the number 1 defensive prospect in the country, obviously the number 1 ranked defensive lineman, someone that Georgia is very much coveting there. And really, and this leads me to talk about the outside linebacker position as well here. Narini is not a strict, traditional defensive lineman, and say the way you think of a guy like Jalen Carter or Devontae Wyatt. He's going to be a guy who, because of his athleticism, I think has the ability to sort of be just like an end. Michael Williams is not the same type of defensive end that Trayvon Walker and Malik Herring were for Georgia. They use him differently. And I think that's maybe the mold that Narini is going to follow in that, he is an edge rusher of sorts, but within Georgia's, defensive alignment, you wouldn't exactly call Williams an outside linebacker. And both Michael Williams and Williams-Narini, I think, sort of fit that bill. And so you may not see Georgia go heavy on the outside linebacker position in this class, but if they get Williams-Narini, I think that checks off what they were sort of looking for in terms of a pass rusher and a guy that can come in and make an impact there. Inside linebacker, as it stands right now, Georgia has a commitment from DeMarcus Riddick. Everyone that has sort of followed that recruitment does not expect that commitment to stick. He's expected to make his final decision on July 26th. It sounds like Alabama and Auburn, 2 in-state programs, are really pushing for him. And we'll see, obviously Georgia has made an effort to continue to recruit him. We'll see how that goes there. The 3 big names to know: Justin Williams, who is a high school teammate of Joseph Jonah Ajoye, someone that Georgia had on campus last month. You look at what Georgia has done in terms of putting linebackers into the NFL and the success that they have had there. You understand why Georgia is battling Oregon for the number 1 ranked linebacker in the 2024 recruiting cycle. And then obviously the 2 Virginia guys, Chris Cole and Christopher Jackson, 2 big names to know there at that inside linebacker position. And then in the secondary, the two real names left. Look, you have Ellis Robinson committed. You have Peyton Woodyard committed. You have Jalen Hayward committed. You have DeMello Jones committed. That's a really strong secondary as it already is. Two guys left are two in-state guys. Cam McHale out of Statesboro, four-star prospect, a guy that probably a star at the next level, but a guy who can do a lot and is a guy that Georgia has long run in their class. And then probably if I had to, from a PR standpoint and just with the way Georgia has won with their defense in recent years, there is not, I think, a more important player in this class for Georgia left, or that is least uncommitted, than KJ Bolden. The five-star safety is set to announce his commitment on August 5th. He is from Beaufort, Georgia. I would point out that Georgia has not signed a five-star prospect out of Gwinnett County since 2014 when they did it with Lorenzo Carter. Dylan Raiola, Georgia's five-star quarterback, will be playing his senior season at Beaufort High School. That should make things very interesting there. And you would think potentially help Georgia maybe land KJ Bolden. Obviously, Ohio State, the big program battling Georgia for Bolden services. Alabama has also made an impression on Bolden. Clemson, I know, got him on campus. And so sort of wrapping everything up, the guys that they have left. And there's certainly some big names out there. Williams Narini, Justin Williams, Nathan Frazier. To top it all off, the biggest fish, the biggest whale still out there for Georgia is KJ Bolden. If they land him, you got the number one cornerback, you got the number one quarterback, you got number one tight end according to some services there, potentially the number one running back and Nate Frazier as well. If you get a number one safety and a number one defensive lineman in Williams Narini, that is a GOAT level recruiting class. And I even feel weird saying that, but that is what Georgia potentially has out there left with some meat on the bone after a mega recruiting week where Georgia 26 commitments right now. By far, that is the most at this point in the cycle under Kirby Smart. There have been times, where Georgia doesn't even sign 26 guys. And obviously there are going to be a few decommitments. That happens in every class. DeMarcus Riddick, I think, is an obvious candidate there for that position right now. But this is sort of the new wave of Georgia recruiting where, again, they might not have the volume of this level every year. They're going to try and get a lot of their work done early. And so with that, we were going to talk a little bit about guys that Georgia could send to SEC Media Days. We'll keep this quick and move in here. I think the guys to know, obviously, Brock Bowers, I think he's the best player in the SEC. I think he's potentially the third best player in the country, maybe even second. Him and Marvin Harrison are right there in terms of what they do and the impact they have on the game. I think Cedric Van Pran would be an excellent ambassador for Georgia. He did this a year ago. I think he's a guy I very much enjoy talking to and would represent Georgia incredibly well. I think those are the two obvious candidates from the offensive side of the ball. And then defensively, you can go in a lot of different directions here. Zion Logue, I would expect to be a guy that potentially gets the nod, a well-spoken member of this team, a guy that is well-respected, also someone from Tennessee. And with that Media Days being in Nashville, that factors into that. I think, were Jamon Dumas-Johnson not to be arrested earlier this offseason, I think he would have been a candidate, but because he was, that probably removes him from possibly being that. And then two guys in the secondary, Kamari Lassiter is a guy I think Georgia's going to want to get out there. I think this is a guy that, with the right buzz, with the right PR push, could possibly be an All-American level player, given his production and given, what his ceiling is as a player. And then Javon Buller, the guy who was the MVP in both of Georgia's college football playoff games. I think a guy that a lot of people like, and as a guy who, the first couple of times we talked to him, you could tell he was a little bit nervous, but a guy that has really, opened up the more he has spoken to the media, and is a guy who I think is a great story to tell, was not highly recruited, but a guy that has come into Georgia and made an obvious mark, and is a guy that is not just going to play a big role on the field for Georgia this year, but is also going to be a key leader for this program as well. And so with that, we will open it up to questions. I will make a final prediction here as far as the three guys that will speak in Media Days for Georgia. I think it's going to be Brock Bowers. I think it's going to be Cedric Van Pran. And I think it's going to be Zion Logue. It's not necessarily the sexiest options. I know Tate Ratledge is someone who could certainly do this as well. Kamari Lassiter, we touched on. Javon Bullard is a name to know. But I think the three guys that you're going to see Georgia send, Brock Bowers, obvious best player on the team, best player in the country. Cedric Van Pran, I think the emotional heartbeat of this team. And Zion Logue, a trusted veteran on the defensive side of the ball. So those are the three guys I think you will see announced as Georgia speakers this week at SEC Media Days. And so with that, we will open it up. And I have talked a lot, so I'm going to take a swig of water and see what kind of questions you guys have. Ken Feinberg, that's a good A good name I probably should have mentioned as well. Lad McConkey is certainly a guy that is mentioned there. Tough stuff. I think Georgia's going to take 3 linebackers in this class. And the question is, if Riddick stays, it's probably Chris Joseph and Justin Williams. And then if Riddick leaves, I think that opens the door for Chris Cole. Let's see. Rodney White. See, that you're right, but that's also part of the reason why I think Georgia sends him. You don't want someone that is going to be controversial. You want someone that's going to represent the program well, is going to, keep it sort of down the line, down the middle there. And I think Brock Bowers absolutely does that to a T. Thomas T-Bone. I would say if you think Georgia's winning the national championship this year, they're probably going undefeated. Now, that's hard to say from a, 10,000 foot view just because it is really hard to go undefeated. But you look at that schedule every week. I mean, other than Tennessee, I don't believe there's a really challenging game on this schedule. And part of the reason Tennessee is going to be challenging is just because of the location of that game. And Georgia is just, in my opinion, they figured out Josh Heupel's offense. And until I see Heupel have real success against a Kirby Smart-led defense, I'm just going to be skeptical that this team has the talent to do so. And look, Hendon Hooker was a guy who was taken in the 3rd round in the NFL draft last year, and was a guy many thought should have been a Heisman finalist, probably would have been if he had been able to finish out the season. And as good as he was and as talented as those Tennessee wide receivers were a season ago, they couldn't do anything against Georgia that day. And so that's sort of why I remain skeptical there. And so to your larger point, if you think Georgia's winning it all this year, it's probably a safe bet to say they're going to go undefeated as well, because with that schedule, I don't know how much room for margin of error they're going to have in terms of if they lose a game, are they going to be, unless it's the SEC championship game against an also either unbeaten like Alabama, LSU, I'll throw Texas A&M in there, sure. But, let's say they were playing last year's LSU team with that resume, 9-3, where they'd lose to that team in the SEC championship game. Is a 12-0 Georgia against that schedule getting in? I mean, probably, but you wouldn't necessarily feel great about it. And so if you feel confident enough that Georgia's going to win a national championship this year, I think they have to do it by going undefeated. Let's see. Y'all gotta leave Tate Ratledge alone. Like, I saw some of the stuff out there, like, and I forget, I think it was Rodney who mentioned earlier, Brock Bowers doesn't say anything. Tate Ratledge made a comment about the structural setup of Neyland Stadium, and everyone is just flaming him left and right on Twitter. Like, y'all gotta it's okay that someone else has an opinion, and that makes it, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't want these guys to be interesting, engaging players, engaging and thoughtful people, and then get mad at them when they share those thoughts and opinions. And I hope that Tate doesn't sort of go into a shell after this. This is the reality of giving takes and giving thoughts out there. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're going to get misconstrued. The point you were trying to get across doesn't always get made or get, accepted the way that you want it to. And I think Tate has unfortunately sort of seen the negative aspect of that. Like, look, Tennessee's a cool stadium. I've said this before. I deeply enjoy watching games at Jordan-Hare Stadium. When Auburn is competitive, that is a really difficult place to play. That road venue, that road game in the 2019 season, when Georgia got out to, I think it was a 21-0 lead early, maybe it was 21-7. When Auburn was trying to come back in that game, the crowd absolutely made you believe that Auburn was going to do it. And you were just wondering, and BA and I were on the sidelines sort of wondering, how is Georgia going to find a way to hang on to this? And they somehow did, because Bo Nix missed a pass to a fullback out in the flat. And Georgia did just enough offensively and defensively that day to come away with a win. Tiger Stadium and LSU, great place to play. Guys are allowed to have opinions. And, I'm glad that Tate felt willing to share it, and I hope he continues to do so. If someone has an opinion that you don't like and agree with, you shouldn't get mad at them. You should just sort of acknowledge it and say, okay, I disagree, and then go from there. And I hate that for Tate. If you're out there watching, you're someone who's mad at Tate for sharing that opinion, find some other place to place that anger. Let's see. Thoughts, comments, questions. David Wayne, how tall is Dylan Raiola? Yes. Dylan is 6'3", 6'2". He's certainly not small. He's not in that sort of Bryce Young, Stetson Bennett mode, but you know, the whole, you can't see over your offensive line. There are ways to work around that. Bryce Young is someone who, had those sort of thoughts or concerns and found a way around it, found a way to win a Heisman at Alabama when, he was playing in front of similarly big offensive linemen. Let's see. Thoughts, comments. D Brown, next recruit to join the class. If I had to give a guess, I will say it's KJ Bolden, and part of that is because I know we have a firm date on him that is August 5th. Now I know that seems unconscionable that Georgia would have to wait that long to get another commitment, but I believe there's not anyone off the top of my head that is scheduled right now. However, I will point out, and I've realized the mistake I've made. So Justin Tell is going to be going on vacation here in a little bit, and if anyone who follows recruiting knows, if someone who covers recruiting goes on vacation, our friend Rusty Manziel of Dogs HQ was on vacation this past week. You saw Georgia pick up a slew of commitments. Justin Tell is going to be going on vacation here in a little bit, and I got a feeling you're going to see a commitment or two when Mr. Santel is on his well-deserved vacation, as he was quite busy this past week. Really fly. That's a great name that I forgot to bring up. Aiden Breland on the defensive line there. That is someone Georgia's going to continue to recruit. A teammate of Nate Frazier's out there at Mater Dei. I would definitely say they have a chance. I'll be interested in seeing when he makes his decision, and if that goes into the season and that goes longer, is Georgia able to get him to take an unofficial visit? That's going to be really difficult with him coming from California. And a guy like Nate Frazier, he took his unofficial visit first and saved that official visit for later. If Breland's able to make it back to Georgia at another point, potentially at the end of July on an unofficial, I would say that would certainly help his environment there. Eric, that goes to sort of Tate's point earlier. Tennessee just fits a lot more people there. I mean, you stand down there on the field, and it's built like one of those European Gothic cathedrals where it's just straight up. It is certainly a different environment than what you're seeing at Sanford Stadium, which is much more just like natural bowl shaped. And I think that's sort of what Tate was trying to convey there. Let's see. Sherrod Rockmore on Zion Raggins out of Jones County. Georgia obviously recruited him. I believe he took a visit to Georgia in June. Sounds like Oklahoma or Florida State is where he is ultimately going to end up going. Let's see. Thoughts, comments. How many more recruits is Georgia going to be allowed to get? I have to double check on this, but I believe that there is no more sort of initial counter limit. And so long as you're able to get 285 scholarships, and Georgia's obviously wizards when it comes to doing that math there isn't a set limit. And so if I'm, making a guess here, I'd maybe say 29, maybe 30 in this class. And part of the reason for that is because Georgia traditionally just loses plenty of players to the transfer portal, and that sort of allows you to restock elsewhere. And part of that is also on the what the NCAA is doing going forward with the number of players, because obviously it used to be a rule where you could only have 25 players, and then it changed a little bit because of the pandemic. And I imagine if it has not already, it's going to change once again as they take the factor of what the transfer portal does to the roster in terms of turnover there. This is a good question to Various Grissom. If UGA lands Bolden, do you see Woodyard flipping? I will say it's probably going to be hard to keep both Peyton Woodyard and Jalen Hayward committed in that class. And so it'll be interesting going forward to see if Georgia does keep three safeties. I know they want to. I think Hayward is probably more of a star going forward, where Woodyard and Bolden maybe fit your more traditional safety looks. Let's do maybe a few more questions here, and then we'll head on out. Let's see. Thoughts, comments. If not, that might give us a reason to head on out and enjoy this beautiful Sunday, where I don't think it rained today. My understanding is it rained quite a bit while I was not in the beautiful state of Georgia, and so we will gladly take the no rain that comes our way, obviously. So you know what? With that in mind, we are going to probably call it a show for tonight. Busy week ahead, obviously. Brandon Adams, Monday through Friday on DawgNation Daily. Jeff Santel I believe he's going to have a show on Wednesday before he takes his obviously much-needed vacation. You'll have Mike Griffith on the beat on Monday night. Our friend Michael Carvel back from his well-earned vacation as well. So busy week here, obviously, fallout from the way Georgia has continued to recruit so dominantly of late here. And then as well, previewing SEC Media Days. I believe this time next week, I will be in Nashville. I'll probably try and do a show that Sunday night, sort of previewing things. Georgia goes on Tuesday. We should learn this week who Georgia's media representatives are going to be for Media Day. Obviously, we'll have a story on that. Story on Georgia's offensive line and what Stacey Searles has been able to do there. But, big recruiting week for Georgia. What comes next from what is left for Georgia in terms of the recruits still out there? And obviously answering your guys' questions. It's been great to be back. Excited to get back to work tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Connor Riley. This has been a DawgNation production.